Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the special board meeting. Mr. Berlingo, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Ms. Chrysler?
Here.
Mr. Hairston? Here. Ms. Mooring?
Here.
Ms. Piccolo-Antonio?
Here. We have just a few things on the agenda for the special board meeting tonight. And I guess for anyone who is watching the live stream, if you have not watched our meetings before, we have a special board meeting and then we are going to adjourn from the special board meeting and we have a committee meeting. So I think the stream will just continue, but if you're out there watching, wondering what's going on, we have some board action items for the special board meeting. So there is one item for action under financial business. Is there a motion to approve item number 1 under financial business?
So moved.
Thanks, Mrs. Mooring. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Any discussion?
I hope. Are you going to describe what this is?
I can describe it. This is a standard appropriation that would be made every year for the payments related to the certificates of participation. Technically, they are not considered debt, so therefore they're subject to appropriation by the board in order to make payment each year. So this covers the annual payment for fiscal year 22.
For what is it for COPS?
The 48 million of COPS that were issued.
The new issue?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And it just got missed on the last month?
Typically, I would have done it when we did the final appropriations in September. But according to the provisions, it needs to be done in July. So I added it to the agenda.
So when we do it next year?
It'll be done in June. We'll do it as part of temporary.
That's,
June.
okay, I think that's my question too. So normally it'll be done as part of temporary appropriations.
Correct.
And then we wouldn't have to do it as an appropriation increase.
Right.
Okay. Any additional discussion? Mr. Berlingo, can you call the roll, please?
Ms. Piccolo-Antonio,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Ms. Chrysler,
Yes.
Mr. Hairston,
Yes.
Ms. Moore.
Yes.
We have one item for action under educational pupil programs and services. Is there a motion to approve item number 1 under letter B?
I'll move.
Thanks, Mrs. Chrysler. Is there a second?
Second.
Was that Mr. Hairston?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion?
Is this a normal appropriation? And do we usually have ESSER funds?
We don't
No,
normally
these-
have ESSER funds.
I know, that's what's kind of throwing me off. Is this a
new
normal
program?
payment?
It's,
Bridges intervention?
I'm not familiar with what Bridges intervention is.
Yeah, so do you want to talk about bridges?
Yeah,
We're looking at Sue.
it is a part of the ESSER fund allocation. It's an additional program for math intervention. And it's the resources for that.
Okay, so for sort of to kind of fill in the gap
Correct.
from COVID.
Yes,
Okay, and that's federal government money?
yes.
Thank you.
Any additional discussion? Okay, Mr. Berlingo, can you call the roll?
Ms. Mooring,
Yes.
Ms. Piccolo-Antonio,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Ms. Chrysler,
Yes.
Mr. Hairston.
Yes.
And then we have 11 items for action under human resources. If there's not an objection to taking those 11 items together, is there a motion to approve items number 1 through 11 under letter C?
I'll move.
Thanks, Mr. Hairston. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Mooring. Any discussion?
I would just like to thank Shay Reed and Lynn and Rebecca in our HR office. They've been working really hard to fill final positions before the start of school. We started school early this year, and so they've been working really hard, getting close to being fully staffed. I would point out that one item on here, hiring 6 FTE bus drivers, so 6 positions. Those will be long-term substitute positions, and they're most likely to be bid on by experienced drivers. In the past, we've had our newest drivers be substitute drivers, and so that's difficult because you're driving a different route every day and you're just learning how to drive a bus. And so the folks who are likely to bid on these jobs will be folks that know every part of Gahanna and Jefferson Township. It'll be safer, and our regular drivers will have routes that they'll drive every day, the same route, and they'll get acclimated and they'll learn. And we think it'll help with retention, because driving a bus is very stressful. It's not easy to learn. It's not easy to get a license. We're very close to having the number of bus drivers we need. Our magic number is 64, and we're at about 61 right now. And we have 3 people testing, and we interviewed some folks that are either driving for Coke or Pepsi or OSU and places like that. And so we're hoping that they can come and join us. The new contract, I think, is helping us recruit, and I think it'll also help us retain drivers. So proud of our transportation supervisor, Jason Key, our union president, Sonia Hansen. They are working really, really hard to fill spots, and every district is very short of drivers. And they had a recruiting event last Saturday, and they had 15 or 20 people come, and they actually called back because they were able to say we're paying $23 an hour. So HR is helping them call drivers, get them in to get background checks, and metaphorically we say get them in the tent so that we're ready to drive. So everybody's been working really, really hard. We were afraid we wouldn't have enough drivers to begin the school year, and I think we're going to be really close, but I'll let you know if we fall a little bit short.
We're short one. You've
Yeah,
driven,
we'll
right?
have to probably combine rounds. That's why
Pretending we didn't
I
hear
said
that.
it's awfully hard to learn how to drive a bus. So I haven't done that yet, so I won't be driving. But at the end of the day, it is complex. I mean, just to do a pre-trip. So part of the test to drive is a pre-trip. You have to identify 150 different things to pass it. And so. They've done a great job out there, and I'll let you know where we're at. We have 3 drivers being trained by our onboard instructor, that have been trained by our onboard instructors that test next week with the Highway Patrol. So hopefully they'll pass their tests, and if they don't, we'll coach them up and they'll try again.
So the 3 that are on this agenda, the bus drivers to hire, they've been through all of
Yeah,
that.
they've been through all that, right?
And just clarify for me, the 6 FTE positions that we're adding, we expect those to be absorbed from the part-time squad that we have now?
Already full-time drivers with routes will likely take these long-term sub positions, because they'll not be 5 hours, which is what our normal route is. They'll be 6 hours. So they'll want more
Okay, that's what I
hours.
was,
Yeah.
right, okay. All
So
right.
substitute routes are normally 6 hours.
And why is the additional hour?
Because, they, some of them do midday routes. They just, we find that, to get subs, having that extra hour is really, really important to retain them.
What about, did you have a question?
I was just gonna ask, I know we've had several school nurses resign, and I see, I think 1 on here.
Yeah.
Are we gonna be able to have,
I think we'll start the year with full staff nurses.
Well, school nursing, actually, we haven't finalized the final position. We did 3 interviews yesterday. I'm doing 2 tomorrow. Actually, that pool has been the most rich pool of all of our candidates in the last month. So we have, fortunately, some additional candidates we want to screen before we make a final decision.
that's awesome.
I was gonna ask, I guess just in general, do we have all of the positions filled that we need to have filled to start school? Not just bus drivers, but.
We're very, very close. There's some hard to find positions. We're really grateful we found the FCS position, Family and Consumer Science. That's, there's not a whole lot of
Right,
people
that's
doing that. And so
right.
we found a great candidate who's moving into out of state, and she'll be, that was our top position. We are, though, short school psychologists, and And that's been really, really difficult, and I think other districts are short. Did you want to say anything about our school psychologist?
We're currently down 0.7 of a school psychologist. It's a position that we have open that primarily does our out-of-district evaluations and scholarship evaluations. We've had, I think, 7 agencies looking for us since spring, and I've done probably only 4 or 5 interviews, not a lot, and not all of them were credentialed. So that's a very challenging one.
Yeah, you've worked all summer to try to find an extra school site. And we had 1 position this summer and then a 0.7 as well.
We had a maternity leave and a 0.7.
Any additional discussion? Mr. Berlingo, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Hairston,
Yes.
Ms. Mooring,
Yes.
Mr. Colantonio,
Yes,
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Ms. Chrysler.
Yes.
thank you. I think that's it. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Is there a second?
I have a second.
Thank you, Mrs. Chrysler.
Yes.
I can't see it.
I know, I'm gonna.
Any discussion? Mr. Berlingo, can you call the roll again?
Ms. Chrysler,
Yes.
Mr. Hairston,
Yes.
Ms. Mooring,
Yes.
Mr. Colantonio,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
6:26.
6:26. We're adjourned. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Good job, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for letting us do these additional hires. This meeting is really important for Shay and our team.
Adjourned.
You want him to stop talking?
I do.
That's
awesome.
Sorry.
He said, no, that's okay.
Is the stream, is it just continuous? Okay, the stream is continuous.
So it's still going. We're still being taped.
So Judy, we are adjourned. I'm sorry, we adjourned, so if anybody wants to come in.
So, I think we're well waited.
Yeah, I think. So there's seats around the table and around the outside. You're more than welcome to join us at the table.
Wherever you're most comfortable, great.
But you're an old doesn't.
Jennifer, will you just ask people to talk very loud? I live in white noise. Yeah.
I can't hear, so I could barely hear Pearl, but I can read her lips.
Okay, I will.
Most people that I don't know, I can't read their lips.
Yeah, I will. And I'm a fast copy, so I'm always hard to read lips too, and then when I start using my hands.
Yeah, then it's
It's
really good.
There's some seats at the table, if you'd like to sit at the table. There's still some seats available, or you can sit around the end. It's 6:30, start? Okay. Okay. Are you good to go over there? Matt?
I think he's still student.
Is he?
Yeah.
All right, so good evening. Oh, there's mics in the middle. Okay. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to the July 28th Student Learning and Achievement /COVID Committee. My name is Jennifer Chrysler. I'm the chair of this committee. It is 6:30, so we will call the meeting to order. And in attendance from the board, we have Mrs. Pico Antonio, for the record, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Hairston, Mrs. Moring, and myself. Just welcome all of you. This is the first in-person meeting we've had since March of 2020, and so this is really, really exciting to be here with everybody today. There was a couple other committee meetings that had already occurred in person, and so this is the first one that I chair, and I am really, really excited tonight about that. We are dealing with a little bit of trying to have this meeting in a discussion format like we typically do with our committees, and also make sure that we're recording for people at home. So if you don't mind, we do have some recording devices here in the middle, and then we have some over by Matt, who's taking care of all of our technical needs tonight. There's also some white noise, if you can hear it in the background, so you might want to speak up a little bit if you have comments, and if you can't hear, please let us know. I do want to take a minute because many of you may have attended some of our committee meetings before, maybe you've heard about them or you've listened online. But I just want to talk to you about a little bit about what the committee structure is so that you know how we deal with public participation and how this dialogue works. The committees, right now we have 3 committees. This is Student Learning and Achievement /COVID. I hope I take that slash off sometime soon. We also have Policy Committee, which is a committee that reviews all of the policies that we adopt as a board within the district. And then we have the Finance /Facilities Committee. The typical structure for these committees, we don't have speaker slips, there's not timed participation. We usually sit in a round table. We have very, very good attendance at these committee meetings, and it's really an opportunity for people to come and hear about the different topics that are on the agenda. We are limited to only talking about the topics that are on the agenda because that's how they were advertised. But it's really been a time and a place for us to hear a little bit about the topic from either members of the administration, teachers, principals, sometimes students, and ask questions, have a dialogue, and really discuss the topic at hand. In this particular case, we have probably more people than we actually have ever had at a committee meeting. And so we're just gonna wing it, right? And kind of work together and figure this out. I think we can do it together. What our expectation is overall with a large crowd is that anybody that wants to speak, whether you have a question or whether you have a comment, we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to participate. So I will try my best to kind of just keep going around the room and going around the table and making sure that people have the opportunity to ask questions or to make comments. If you already get a question answered by somebody else or part of the presentation, don't feel like you have to participate. It's okay to go ahead and take a pass. And if you don't feel like I've called on you or you have something else you want to say, just make sure that you get my attention and we'll try to make sure that you're heard. Because there's no bylaws for participation, it is a little bit different because you're not going to be timed in what you say. And I guess that should apply to me too because I've been talking for the last 4 minutes. But I just want to make sure that we're being respectful of everybody else's time. I do need to point out that at the board meeting last week, and I'm just touched by what had happened. There was an item on the agenda that is very much controversial in our community right now, and there was a lot of people that came that felt very differently about that topic and spoke. And the folks sitting next to me, actually, I commented when I got home about the example that they set in that public meeting. They were the first to speak. And the next dissenting opinion after them, they were the first ones to clap for that person. And we don't clap, we don't need to clap here, it's just supposed to be in the but like, with that type of grace, I mean, at the end of the day, there's gonna be topics in every single one of these committee meetings, and it has been our experience that there has been topics that have been either controversial or the people that are around the table and in the room don't agree. But at the end of the day, this is still our collective school community and we're still neighbors, and to show that kind of love and grace to one another, I think would be very, very appropriate. So that's how it's gonna work. We're gonna go ahead and start with the first item on the agenda. Typically, there is a presentation from staff or students, and then we have an opportunity as a group to ask questions and talk about that. So I'm gonna turn it over to Tia Holloman, who's gonna talk about assessment and instruction to support pandemic learning needs.
Thank you. So yes, my name is Tia Holloman and I am the Director of Curriculum. Just want to kind of give a general overview of the things that we've been planning as we prepare to come back to school in hopefully a normal fashion. We know that the pandemic has had a major effect on teaching and learning, and we know that there are a lot of changes from quickly having to learn how to do school online to the multiple learning model changes throughout the year, social distancing and all those things. And so we know that we're going to feel the effects of the pandemic for many years to come, but we have been really working hard to be proactive and having a concerted effort to help support our students and staff as they come back this year. So we can go to the next slide. One of our first major updates is that we have adopted a universal screening tool, which is NWEA MAP. What we know is that in order to be able to provide students the best supports to meet their needs, we have to have good information about where they are and what they're able to do. And so that means that we need quality data, consistent data that gives us that information. And so with the universal screener in general, it is meant to be that initial assessment that identifies where students are performing, and it helps us to measure growth over time. It is typically an assessment that is administered 3 times a year, typically, a fall, a winter, and a spring administration. And it really does kind of help us to kind of gauge, where they're performing, and then, like I said, that growth over time. And then the third point of, generally speaking, a universal screener is that it provides consistent and normed data for students. And basically just what that means is, when you have a tool that is administered to many students, you can kind of assess and see where students fall in comparison to other students in like grades and similar demographics. But it is one data point that will help us to better determine what are going to be those supports that we need for students. So next slide, please. And so what we have realized, before I go into more information specifically about MAP growth, and so that's the universal screener that we have chosen, we knew that we have good sources of data for our students. We have great data in literacy. We have really good data elementary, and then it starts to vary as we move through math and as we move through middle and high school. And so that was another reason for our decision to look into a universal screener that will give us more of that consistent look and picture from our students K-12 in both literacy and in math. And so when we looked at the MAP growth, it is the measures of academic performance. It is a growth measurement. This tool measures performance in reading and math. We looked at MAP growth. We actually put together a committee of teachers and administrators across the 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school, and did some comparison of other tools that are out there. And we were looking for tools that are widely used across the state and across the country so that we could get some good norm data. We were looking for tools that would give us good data in both math and reading. And we were also looking for tools that would help to meet some of the other requirements that the state of Ohio has for us, like the 3rd grade reading guarantee, the K3 reading diagnostic, and our gifted identification. And MAP met all of those. And so that was the reason with the team of staff, we made the decision to go with MAP. I'm going to take a brief pause and just, there's a link in there to give a little bit more information about our math growth.
Math growth measures what your child knows and is ready to learn. This assessment was created by NWEA, a not-for-profit organization. NWEA was founded in 1977 by educators and researchers with the mission of partnering to help all kids learn. More than 9 million students in the US and in 140 countries worldwide use Math Growth. Most schools give Math Growth tests in the fall, winter, and spring. The test is adaptive, which means that it adjusts to each student's responses. If a student gets a question right, it gets harder. If a student gets a question wrong, it gets easier. The test is not concerned with which grade a student is in. It will go as high or low as it needs to. This helps you see if your child is testing above, below, or right at their grade level in all types of subjects, including math, reading, language usage, and science. Students receive an individual RIT score at the end of the test. Math Growth measures student performance with our RIT scale, the most stable and mature scale in the industry. This scale measures and tracks performance across grade levels, so you'll be able to see your child's growth from year to year and over multiple years. Another great thing about the RIT score is that you can connect it to online resources. For example, you can get book suggestions based on a student's reading level and use free sites like Khan Academy, which provide practice exercises based on your child's learning needs. NWEA also has a College Explorer tool that lets you enter your child's RIT score to see which colleges they can likely get into. Teachers also get a student report after the test. This report explains what the student knows and helps the teacher and the student set goals for learning. Every 3 years, NWEA provides schools with norms. This is anonymous data for more than 10 million students around the country. It tells teachers and students the top, middle, and bottom scores of all these students combined, so they can compare where a student is to other students and help them grow. A teacher can then say to a student, "Wow, you're in the 98th percentile. What kind of work will keep you challenged?" Or, "You're in the 58th percentile for math. Let's look at where you need help." Math Growth improves both teaching and learning by giving teachers accurate information about your child. For more information,
Go back to the presentation. And so there definitely, we will have more information to put out to families, speaking specifically about the test and the scoring and things of that nature as the year goes on. But just a couple of things that I wanted to point out before you can go back to the previous slide before we touch base on that. So I did want to point out, as I had mentioned, from a universal screener perspective, we're looking for something that is used more widely, the more students to be able to compare the data. And so within Ohio, MAP is used in over 275 districts. I did list some of the districts around us that use MAP. And then across the country, over 45,000 schools use MAP data. So there's a ton of data in there, a ton of student data in there to help with that norming and to just give an idea. But the one thing that I do want to stress and that we understand and will continue to emphasize is that it is just one data point. So it is not the end all be all. It is one data point that we will use with the span of the additional assessments that we have in data. But as I had mentioned earlier, we're really trying to be proactive in our approach in supporting kids. And while we know we have great data from the state and from national assessments that we have had, a lot of times we don't get that information until the spring or the summer. And so then it's reactive and we're making changes for the following year after the students are gone. And we're a universal screener in that fall, winter, and spring. It gives us an opportunity to be more responsive in the moment. But basically what it'll do is we'll get the information and we'll say, let's learn more about this kid, these students based on what this test is telling us. So we're not getting rid of all of our other assessments, and I will eventually show some of the other assessment data that we'll use to be able to make that informed decision about students. But it is one that is going to help us to better understand where our students are. That was one of the things that we did realize coming in from the pandemic, is that there were a lot of questions about exactly where our students are, and to how to best support them.
Tia, can I ask a question?
Yes.
How quickly from the time that student takes a test to the time that the data is back? I mean, because that delay is wasted time, right?
Yes.
So we
24
have
hours.
24 hours?
Because as
That's
mentioned, so you can go to the
Better
next
than we've
slide
ever had.
now. MAP is a web-based test. It is done on the computer. And something else that was a selling point with the team that reviewed it is that the platform for MAP is very similar to the platform that we use for the Ohio State test, the online platform there. So students and teachers are familiar with the types of questions that are asked and how to manipulate the questions and the answers on the test. So that is one plus. And then also the reporting, we get that back very quickly. So it is going to be a learning process, because learning how to pull the reports and understand the reports, that's a part of the learning that our staff will go through this year. But we will get that information much quicker than what we get for some of our other assessments. So it can be more actionable. And so just a couple of other things to point out. It is an untimed test. But on average, it takes about 45 to 50 minutes per subject. So that would be a reading and a math. They say on average for K and 1, it's about 30 minutes. And they recommend like chunking it so that it's not like a full sit down and do that. There are 43 questions for reading and 50 questions for math.
How does the test know where to start with a student?
So students will, yes, that is a great question, yes. So the student information will be imported in the grade level that they're at that's where they'll start, and then it'll begin to level. So students will get different questions. As I said, that's the adaptive piece based on how they're responding. And so we have planned that we will be testing grades K through 10 as a universal screener. And then we'll be using it as a diagnostic tool for everyone else. And so typically, just in the research with universal screeners, it typically tops out at high school, and they generally recommend one time a year, but we will be doing twice a year just to kind of begin to build that data story for our high school students. In addition to that, for the middle school and high school, the math test is an algebra and a geometry test. So it will, for those students in those classes, so it will be able to give information related to those classes. Question into that? Yes.
Am I allowed to ask?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have 4 children in the district, 3 of which are on IEPs. Is this going to be in addition to, do I need to speak louder?
Yeah, sorry, we can't
I have
hear.
4 children in the district, 3 of which are on IEPs. I'm not a massive fan of more testing, and so my children go through a lot. So my question is this in addition to all of the tests they are already doing, or is this replacing something else? I don't know if you said that, I missed it.
Yeah, no, actually didn't clarify that, but it is. The point is for us to be able to streamline a lot of our testing. And so that was the reason, another one of the reasons why we picked MAP, because we can use it for multiple required tests, like the 3rd grade reading, like the diagnostic, like the gifted, where we used to do Iowa. We can replace those tests with this one. Yes, so we have worked to streamline some of the assessments.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. And so with that, so don't be alarmed by this. As I just said, we did streamline. but we do still have assessments that will be available, whether at the district level, the classroom level, and state required and nationally required assessments that we'll give. But as I mentioned, we know that, one assessment alone is not going to give us a full picture of where students are and what they're able to do. So it is important that we keep that balance, in addition to the common assessments that are like the unit assessments within classes and classroom observational data. Some of the assessments that are listed up there, though, are used in a more diagnostic fashion. So they're not going to be whole grade assessments that are given to everyone. But again, it's one of those where we, like, for example, we do an administration for MAP, we get a list of students and they say, these students might need additional support. Let's look at those students, and now let's look at what other information we have about these students to see if it is in line. And in those instances, we might have to do some additional testing to get some more information. That testing looks different than like a whole grade test.
I just real quick, is this something, like, how is this administered? Is it done, like, you know how they take sometimes a week to do the state test or something, and each day something different? Is it done by, like, do they go down to the class, computer lab, or how does that work?
It'll be done in the classroom because it can be done right on the Chromebooks. And it is 40 to 50 minutes, so it'll just be done right in the classroom. There will be a schedule created by the buildings to be able to manage it, but it'll happen on a day. They'll do it and then they'll move into their next lesson. So it won't be as massive as the state testing schedules.
Okay, so, but each class will do it at the same time, so there's not a bunch of kids running around while a child is trying to do it?
They might, I think by grade level, the buildings are still working through the schedules for that, but it will be a testing environment that's conducive for students, yes. Yes, ma'am.
Will parents be told ahead of time? I mean,
Yes.
again, I know every family is different. I have a child with some severe testing anxiety, so we have to do a lot of prep the day before.
Yes, we actually, parent information will be coming out early this fall once school begins, before we start testing,
And
yes,
we'll be given dates.
absolutely.
Okay.
I noticed over time, a lot of the curriculum is changed in order to appeal to a test. So does that mean the curriculum is going to change also to appeal to this test, or?
No, that's a great question. This assessment is aligned to the state standards and our curriculum is aligned to the state standards, but we will not make adjustments specifically for this test. The alignment is already done and it'll just give us an idea of where students are falling within those standards, but our curriculum is set with that. So then it'll just help us to better support them through those standards.
Tia, have we looked into the technology load that this is going to take? I remember some past testing experiences where we kind of knocked out our Wi-Fi for a time.
Yes, no, so it'll be very similar to state testing. It won't take, but it won't have the near as much bandwidth as what our state test does. And it's a secure browser. It's already connected to the Chromebook, so it's all web-based.
Good.
Sometimes on the map end, there's, like, if everybody's taking the test at the same time, it can get overloaded, but I think MAP has fixed that, and we've approved our bandwidth into the building, so quite a bit, so I think we should be fine.
All right, good.
Next slide. And as he's transitioning, so I talked about, the universal screener and started with assessment because that is a major update that we have done this year. But it still remains that, our classroom teachers and our curricular resources are going to be and have been our major, push to support students. And so just wanted to give a little bit of update of some of the things that are taking place in the classroom and outside of the classroom in order to support them. One of the things is that we will be in school and students will have access to their teachers 5 days. And hopefully that's the plan. And so we'll be able to get back to, the quality instruction and the strategies and the protocols that our teachers are used to using, like workshop, where they're able to be responsive to students in the moment and, pull small groups when they see a question where that might not be as clear when you're operating online, or if a student is at home and doesn't have direct access to the teacher. So that is a big thing. Additionally, we have added some additional alternative instructor supports, and they're specifically centered around providing more targeted interventions for math and reading. And, Matt, you had asked the question, Bridges is one of the tools that our AIs will be using to provide those interventions. And again, so it kind of all goes, we get this picture of where students are and what their needs are, and then we can better align them to the appropriate supports. Many of those supports are going to be able to be taken care of in the classroom with our instruction and with our teachers. Some students are going to need an additional layer where it's more targeted and it's built into their schedule that they can get that intervention. And so we have additional people in order to be able to provide that. We will also have the structures that have been in place, but again, we'll be able to get back to them full stream, like our MTSS process, which is that process to identify students that there might be a concern or a gap that needs to be filled that is greater than what can be done in the classroom. The team builds a service plan, and then the students are given the support that they need. We monitor for 4 to 6 weeks, and then we come back to the table to see. And I do apologize. I just turned around like, oh.
We can hear you like you're facing us here.
But they'll be able to get the support they need, come back to the table and see if that's working or if we need to revise the plan for them. At the high school specifically, the pass room and the academic academic support center is still up and running. And so students will be able to go. The pass room is more of students can go on their own free will, or they can be assigned by teachers to get like homework help, or if they have general questions. And then the academic support center, the ASC, is one where again, it can be more targeted to get isolated support there. And then they have also added an additional math support period. And this one is targeted more for students in algebra and geometry that have been identified as needing a little bit more support in that. So it would be an extra period in their day. And then they're working out a schedule for them to be able to access intentional targeted support for those classes in that. And then just our continued professional learning that we have. So there's a slew of professional learning that's going to happen this year, helping to increase pedagogy, looking specifically about math interventions, looking at writing support, and just generally engaging students after the year that we've had. So that plan is being formalized, and we'll move forward with that.
I'm excited about the math support period.
Yeah.
That algebra, geometry, algebra 2 corridor has been brutal over the years. And so I'm excited to see the focus there. That's good.
I was gonna ask, and I don't know if you're gonna talk about summer, what went on this summer or not, but I guess my question is, so I think we, and you will correct me with numbers, but I think we had more high school students in summer school classes this summer than we've had previously. I guess my question is, for those kids, and I guess also for the kids who didn't get identified for summer school necessarily, but really struggled at the high school level last year, how does remediation work when they've already moved on to a different math or a different English? How does that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we did have an increase in summer school participation. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I can get those. For once we get into the school year, if for students who did not participate in summer school, we do offer credit recovery during the year. It's done in 2 ways. Students can actually be scheduled into a period where they actually go and they do the credit recovery during the school day. We also offer some credit recovery opportunities after school for some students that can't fit it in or don't fit it into their schedule. And basically that is essentially like a summer school, but during the school year. So they still have those opportunities to make up those credits.
Do you know, asking for a friend, do you know if the College Board is allowing AP students who didn't pass the AP exam to retake it because of the pandemic?
I do not have the answer to that, but I will find out.
For your friend.
For my friend.
Yes. Yeah, I will definitely find that out for you and for your friend. Next slide, please. Okay, and so lastly, I just wanted to talk about, so in addition to, getting back to strong core instruction in the classroom, in addition to getting good quality data for our students and really understanding where they are and what they're able to do, we will still have some digital tools available to help supplement and support the learning that's taking place in the classroom. Most of these tools are for reading and for math. Lexia Core 5 and Dreambox are both elementary. And then iExcel Learning is a math digital tool, and Newsella is a literacy tool for middle school and high school. Imagine Learning is a tool that we have used for many years for our English learners. And then Sora is K-12, and that just gives more access to ebooks and audiobooks for students. And we have had that available students for the full year and through the summer. And again, it is just another layer of getting access to more books. With all of these tools, they are adaptive, they are responsive, and they're leveled to meet the needs of the students. but again, they're meant to be a supplement. So last year it was very different for us, and when we decided to bring these on, it was to help to support learning, to keep students engaged in learning when they were at home and away from the teachers. So coming into this year, we're hoping that we don't have to be away from teachers, but they are still a good tool to help supplement and support. So the usage won't be the same, but it is a good, all of these programs are good for repeated practice and extended learning. And if there are maybe some gaps that can be filled in the classroom, that would be like, here's another layer of practice that you can do in that. For those students, again, that need some additional support that is more targeted, they will go, as I mentioned before, into the interventions with someone helping to guide that. But they won't be primary tools of instruction as they have had to be in different instances based just because of the way that we had to do school at times. But they are still good resources for students to keep them engaged in their learning and just that continued practice in those areas.
So you know I'm going to ask the question.
Do.
Because I did ask this question at the board meeting when we approved extension of the contract for, I think, Dreambox and Lexia specifically. And the question, and you answered it in broad strokes,
Yes.
but more specifically, I guess, has there been conversation with the elementary principals, and then have the elementary principals had conversation with the elementary teachers about how those tools are supplemental
Yes.
and not.
Yes, so we have had different conversations in the spring, a little in the summer, and we continue them in the fall. And the curriculum team is also putting together a guidance document that is to be shared with both principals and teachers, and also just kind of see how does this fit within the structure of your workshop and the structure of your day. What are going to be some of those areas where these would be good tools to pull in, how not to use it, those kinds of things. Absolutely, that's the plan. And so that is why I just want to stress it will be different. But they are good tools, and we do see gains when students are participating, but it is they are not meant to replace instruction.
Thank you.
Okay. Last slide is open. I know there have been questions along the way, but is there any other questions?
Well, I think maybe to follow up on Bill's question, to talk a little bit about summer school and how that went.
Yes, so summer school, it actually went really well. We did have a good turnout, and like I said, I will get the numbers. I believe in our elementary though, we were around about the same amount of students that we have had in years past. So not last year, because last year summer school was completely online, but like in summer of 2019, we were around those numbers, but we had a variety of students that accessed the programs, and it was really good. Our teachers did a phenomenal job showing up. We had a number of teachers who did theme days to make the learning fun. We also were able to embed some of the enrichment activities, which a lot of our students and teachers really enjoyed. And so we're really excited about incorporating that type of learning into our summer school moving forward, especially for our elementary and middle. For our high school, we did have a number of students participate, and many of them earned the credit. They were able to recover their credit, so that is good. They're moving on, and they're going to be able to keep going in their studies. But like I said, I'm not prepared with those numbers, but overall, it was a success.
That's great. Any other questions for Tia from anyone around the room? Any board members have additional questions for Tia, or Steve, or Sue, or
I would just like to thank Tia for all her hard work in assembling a team and looking at all the different universal screeners we could have chosen from and finding them, because it's real-time data. Getting it in 24 hours will be really important. Sometimes people call state tests autopsy data because it comes back 3 months later and there's a huge gap in time and you really can't respond to it, but our teachers will be able to use this data in a formative way and actually figure out where the learning gaps are. We know there will be gaps because of the pandemic, and so it'll be really, really important to know where students are to close those gaps. So we know that you were very, very thorough, and the investment in this will be a long-term investment, and we're using ESSER funds to pay for it. So that money is helping us jumpstart this. Yeah.
I do have a question. I saw that they would also be able to test on science, but we chose just math and reading.
Yes, so we're starting with math and science is an optional test. It is an additional purchase, but the full math growth includes both reading and math, so that's where we decided to start. And then as we move through this, we can come back to the table and have discussions if we do want to pull the science test in or any of the other assessments that they offer within their suite.
I just feel like last year, we focused on math and reading, and so science might be further behind than we want, right? And where are the careers that are taking off? They're in science and STEM, right? So
We can definitely look into that.
it's definitely something I think we need to look at.
Absolutely.
Given that they're basically an hour tests, right, the time frame, so it's not like we're adding another day of testing. I think it would be an interesting study.
Just to piggyback on that, what was the budget for purchasing that? And is it a yearly thing that you subscribe to, like you do with Lexi and Dreambox? Which, by the way, I do love my children. They use them during the summer, so I appreciate that being passed so that we could use it. And so then if you needed to purchase science, what does that look like budget-wise?
So I don't have the numbers for science, but I gotta pull up the numbers for.
We used federal dollars to pay for it this year, right?
Yeah,
These dollars.
and we will be able to do next year, I believe, as well.
And
Yeah,
through
the next 3 years.
the next 3 years.
We can use the federal ESSER funds for
Yes.
that. Okay.
And I think it was around $96,000.
92, that's what I was pulling up, but that also includes the professional development that goes in the first year. So learning about the tool, learning how to use the tool, learning how to use the reports and all of the resources that are available for both staff and families. That is included in that. So that 92 is not an annual price. That is like the initial upfront. And then after that, it is around 83 because it's about $12 per student. And again, that's the growth that has both math and reading. Science is an additional, and I don't have those numbers, but I can get those.
Ma'am, you had a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, what's the parent involvement like on this? How soon will the teachers reach out to the parents and let them know what their child scored? If there's any where they need to work, or if they're gifted in anything or anything like that?
Yeah, so we have the way that the windows are designed is that they kind of are very close to progress reports and report cards. So it would be included in that conversation. But also, like, for example, back when I was saying, so if we get the reports and we see that there's a group of students who maybe are flagged with some concerns, they have some gaps, we need to do a deeper dive, we pull those in, the parents are then looped into that conversation, talk about just what we're noticing, and then what is that support plan gonna be for that student.
Well, just me generally, I don't care what my child scored. I want to know.
Yeah. Yes.
So I feel like that no matter what,
Yes.
even if they're doing a deeper dive, you should, this is what your child scored.
Absolutely.
And either we're looking into it, whatever.
Yes.
Any more questions or comments on this topic? Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
As far as I was a little late, but as far as the data, the results and things like that, is that data gonna be shared outside of the district, or is that only internal, like the company I'm not familiar with? Is that data just gonna stay within our district, or how is that secure?
The data is secure. It does stay within our district. We do not share it out. But basically what the reporting is just based on what they have in their system and where our students fall, but no data is shared out with anybody else.
At the student level.
Correct.
But to get the norms, the results.
Oh, yes, but no
categorized.
individual student, right.
It's shared anonymously.
Yes, it is not shared by,
To get the average, the
Correct.
national norm, and that's why it's such a powerful tool, because we can compare kids across the country, thousands and thousands of kids
Yeah.
taking.
yes.
Does that make
but
sense?
not at the student
I
level
mean,
with student
It seems
information,
contradictory,
individual
doesn't it? Because
information.
it says we were comparing against other schools and we'll be in that
Yeah, it makes sense.
pot
It's
of
just,
norm.
it makes sense. It's just, in today's world, concerned that the data is being used in the right way and it's in the hands of the right people and all that kind of stuff. So.
Don't think, I mean, a lot of these companies convert it to a name wouldn't appear with it. It would be
Yes,
assigned
no,
a
it is
number.
completely anonymous. It's just a number that's associated with it, very similarly to the way they compare PSAT and SAT and things of that nature. But no identifiable
They convert to an
information will be
algorithm.
shared or is shared.
Any other questions? Digging on the beard back there? Like, to the hair? This is a whole situation that I'm enjoying. Thank you.
Last year was.
Incognito back here.
I know, not really, right? What are we gonna do? Mickey, one of our teachers. So our next topic for discussion is an update on COVID. We added COVID committee to the Student Learning and Achievement Committee because a lot of the things that we were discussing last year was just 100% COVID related and unfortunately not about, other things that were going on in the district. I do want to answer a few questions that I think came through with emails and just to put some clarification around it, hoping to address some of the questions that came up in before to some of the people that are here in this group today and watching online. There's been a lot of questions about the COVID task force. And so I just want to make a clarification that this is not the COVID task force. This is actually the COVID committee, which is part of the Student Learning and Achievement Committee. So we are under sunshine rules. The COVID committee does not meet without posting an agenda, advertising that agenda, and then having a public meeting that anybody can come and participate and listen. The COVID task force is very, very similar to other advisory groups or facilities committees that we've set up throughout the district for years and years. And so the best example I can think of that's a parallel to it is our master facilities group. It's a group of parents and within the district who have expertise in planning, building, engineering, and really have come together to provide guidance with their expertise. They don't make decisions, they just give the administration information that they can use to bring back to the board and make decisions. Sometimes members of the master facilities group will come and they'll sit and they'll come to a committee meeting and talk about things that they've discussed and we'll get to ask questions. Sometimes they will just give their input to the administration will bring them to the board. So all of the facilities planning that we've done has really come in partnership with those folks. And they're people who live in the community, their kids go to the school in the community and they were chosen to come together. Same with other groups that we've put together. Frequently, in fact, we go out and solicit for parent input. When we hire a treasurer, for example, or superintendent, we have parents that come out sometimes in HR roles within the community and we say, hey, will you be part of this interview committee so that we can hear your thoughts as a parent on what you think about this candidate and or sets of candidates that we're interviewing. The COVID task force, and maybe task force is kind of an extreme word, but it was an extreme year. And so the COVID task force was really born out of just the ultimate confusion that was going on day by day, week by week, and inputs that were coming to us and opinions that were coming to us, and really not having an opportunity to have a group of people from the medical field specifically that were parents that were in the community, so they had vested interest in the community, that could help our administrators understand some of the data that was coming in and how to think about that data in a different way in order to make decisions for the district. They don't always give recommendations. Sometimes it's just an opportunity to talk about different things. I'm actually, Stephen, a minute gonna put you on the spot because I think you and I were just having a conversation generally the other day about a specific example with the purple. And so in a minute, if you don't mind describing that, but really helping us kind of think things through from a medical standpoint. And we talked about this in our board meeting late 2019, late 2020, early 2021. and said, hey, look, we need to get this group of people together because we got to get back to school. Like, we got to figure this out, and we need to change these metrics or come up with these metrics and tiers to get back to school. And so who are these people? We put it out on social media. We went to the PTAs, we went to the schools, we talked about it at our board meeting, and we asked anybody that was a parent or a resident in the district to come forward and to see if they would be willing to volunteer their time to be on this task force. And we were looking for people that represented different focus areas within the medical field. So we wanted somebody with mental health, pediatrics, infectious disease, like any type of medical interest. And that's how the task force was formed. It was the people that were identified in those areas. We really have one individual that's representing each different area. I have a funny story about Dr. Perry. I mean, this is just crazy, but somebody in the community had either been listening to the board meeting or had received something on social media about, hey, if you want to join this task force and medical professional. And this woman called, and I've never met her before. She found my number on the website, and she was like, you don't know me. I am tired. I am upset. I cannot go another day with all this crazy information. The most logical person I know is my pediatrician, and he's got kids in the district. You need to call him and ask him to join the task force. And so I called him, and I was like, this is really strange. You didn't solicit to be on this, but you're a pediatrician that's respected. I think he's your pediatrician too. So that's how I think the task force members came about. And we really tried to look at the end of the day, Franklin County Public Health is represented. We have somebody representing, is a pharmacist and represents pharmacology. We have mental health. We have pediatrics. We have our school nurses who sit on that committee and help provide some data as well. And so that was the process of picking them. Again, they have not been making recommendations on what we should do, but they've been helping the administration and subsequently the board really vet out all of the information that's coming from so many different sources. So that's a little bit about them. Right before I turn it over to Steve though, and I wanna have Steve share that example about what the task force specifically helped us think out a couple of weeks ago, because I think that might answer some very specific questions for some folks that are watching. But I also want to say, again, I want to remind everybody that, this is supposed to be an opportunity to have dialogue. It's going to be a little more difficult to have dialogue because of the number of people in the room and because we might have very different opinions in the room about what the next step should be. We haven't made a decision. We're still trying to gather input and understand. I hope that if anything, that what you're experiencing from either watching this or sitting in this room, like, please come to more committee meetings, come to board meetings, because this is how we do business every single month. Like, everything that we're doing in the district is talked about in these committees. Nothing is being done in secret, and we value your input. And just because we're reading every single email, we're taking every single phone call. So I just encourage you that just because your specific opinion isn't the ultimate decision or route we're taking, that it doesn't mean that we're not listening. It's just there's certain things in the district that people have very different opinions about, and we're trying to figure it out. I'd also like to caution that, and it's something that Rebecca, you wrote in one of your emails that touched my heart from the standpoint that, while we're gathering this information and you were gracious about being so respectful about the time that it takes to gather it and make these decisions, but also expressing the fact that your family needs to make decisions based on this decision. The challenge though, and this is what I think we all need to universally accept, is that things are changing daily. And so whatever decision could be made at the beginning of a year, it doesn't mean that that's not going to change in October, in February, in May. And so and that touched my heart because I don't want any family to ever leave the district. I hope we can always have opportunities for everybody to be successful. But also I understand the stress of trying to figure out what's right for your children. And this is something that even in the last 3 days, I think we can all admit it continues to just change. And so I'm just not sure we can commit to you to say, okay, it's gonna be like this, and this is gonna be the 21-22 school year, no matter what that decision is. So with all of that being said, I'll turn it over to you, Steve, and if you don't mind sharing that quick, I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's, I think it's a great example. So, you know, we, task force was immensely helpful, and one of our first meetings together was we went to a couple of our schools. We went to actually all levels, went to an elementary, a middle, and a high school, and we looked at, you know, the mitigation strategies. We're, you know, at the time, the phone mic transmission, so in other words, virus on a desk or doorknob, we were really all kind of afraid about that. Remember, we were kind of leaving our Amazon packages outside, and we found out that that wasn't really how the virus was transmitted. It was aerosol, it was in the air. And so the task force members, you know, I remember we were at Chapel Field Elementary, we were in a kindergarten class, and I saw that the kids were following all the protocols, and the principals were diligently following the mitigation strategies. And that really informed a lot of the work we did, because they were confident that we had the things in place we needed to have in place to be safe. And, you know, a lot of superintendents, I'm one of them, we were a little bit reluctant that we tied what we did to that color system, the code system that the state had. It was very useful for the state because it measured, you know, hospitalizations, and it measured positivity rates and all of that. But we found out, and the task force helped give us confidence in this, that we could actually operate in school in red or purple safely, as long as we practice social distancing to the greatest extent possible, which was in our schools. We know we're crowded, we're growing, that's why we're building buildings. And that was 3 feet in most of our buildings. And we knew that if we practice with the epidemiologist and FCBH, Franklin County Public Health, that we could operate in purple. But that was like a big hurdle for us to get over, because even red was like, oh, we're red, we should be out of school. And so we learned a lot. We learned that it wasn't a huge risk to be in school in red or purple. And the task force said, look, as long as you're doing the mitigation practices and protocols that you put in place that we saw live, you're going to be okay. And so it was very deliberative, it was very thoughtful, and it was very helpful. All of the different, you know, things, you know, the pharmacologists, we had a nurse that is involved in, you know, addiction. We had, you know, Dr. Perry, a pediatrician, and it was just so helpful to have experts at the table, because these decisions were really, really difficult to make on our own. And the other thing I would say is Sue Wigging is in charge of our nurses. She's over here at the end of the table. And she and the task force helped us with this as well. And Franklin County Public Health had a member of their team on our task force, and she showed up to every one of our meetings. And Sue looked at the quarantine protocols and the things and the contact tracing. So for a while, every case we were calling in Franklin County. So we knew people in Franklin County Public Health by first names. Oh, Brooke, or, you know, or Alex. And pretty soon it became second nature to us, and we didn't need to call anymore. We knew how to do contact tracing, and Sue set up with our nurses a robust, you know, array of practices that allowed us to know our local data. And that local data gave us the confidence that we were not getting spread in schools. Spread was happening in the community. You know, sleepovers, you know, birthday parties, soccer tournaments. And, you know, parents were great in reporting what was happening. But, you know, we had at one point, I remember, we had 800 kids in quarantine, and we had over 100 teachers in quarantine, and we were really struggling to get subs. So another factor the task force helped us with is, you know, one of the triggers for going on remote learning was not having enough teachers to teach and not having enough substitutes. Every district in Central Ohio, every district across the country really struggled to get substitutes. So all of those different aspects, the task force helped us with.
I appreciate that, and I'm sorry for putting you on the spot. So that answers, like, I hope some questions, or just describes the task force itself and the difference between this committee and the task force. What we typically do in this portion of the committee when we give a COVID update is just really talk about where we are and then see if anybody has any questions or comments. So I think we'll just continue to follow that protocol, and then we can go around the room and share.
Yeah, can I just say that every decision we consider as we look to begin school, has one question in mind, and that question is, how do we keep kids in school 5 days a week for 9 months with the least amount of interruption as possible? That is our goal. And we need to have tools in place to meet that goal, because we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that computers cannot replace teachers, and that learning online isn't nearly as strong as learning in person. And so to that end, we're going to look at guidance from the CDC, the Ohio Department of Health, Franklin County Public Health, and right now they're at different places. They're not aligned necessarily in where they are with things like masks and mitigation strategies. So we're going to keep that in mind, and that's what we're going to deliberate with our task force on. Where are people? So right now, the Ohio Department of Health is saying unvaccinated folks need to wear masks when they're indoors. The CDC around 3 or 4 o'clock yesterday said even vaccinated people in high transmission areas need to wear masks indoors. Okay, right now, Franklin County is not a high transmission area for the Delta variant. It's in the moderate, I almost said yellow. I'm trying to get away from the color system. We are moderate right now. If that turns highly transmissible, the task force will weigh in and help us with that.
And created a riot.
Sorry.
It mirrors the German.
Sorry.
That happens with my watch. We want to make rational decisions. We want to weigh the input we've heard from emails like Jennifer talked about, phone conversations we've had with folks, and then we want to hear what you have to say tonight to bring to our task force, so that we have all the data we need to make the right decisions. We have not made a decision about masking at this point, and so in conjunction with the task force and all the different folks we're hearing from, and in conjunction with public health officials, we'll make the best decision we can to keep kids in school 5 days a week, 9 months, with no interruption possible. So that's our goal, is to maintain health and safety, and we know that student well-being and learning well are inextricably linked. They go hand in hand, and that's so important to us. So I think we can open it up for discussion.
Okay, so, sure,
Mr. Barrett, my name's Matt. I'm a father of 2. I'm also a clinical social worker working here in Franklin County. I appreciate you mentioning CDC, Ohio Department of Health, Columbus Public Health. I would add to that the American Academy of Pediatrics. Those 4, both national and local agencies have come out with statements recommending masking in schools. The AAP is probably the most aggressive in saying universal masks for all kids regardless. I think it was the Ohio Department of Health. It talks about unvaccinated kids, but that's our elementary schools. My 2nd grader starts in a couple of weeks. That's her entire school. And the AEP makes a point around universal masking being the easiest way to manage masks, so that staff don't have to, who's vaccinated, who's not, are you wearing your mask? Everyone's wearing a mask, teachers are wearing masks. My youngest, my 3-year-old, has some autoimmune issues and survives asthma. But when she was 5 weeks old, she was in the NICU on a breathing machine with RSV. And so our family has been very aggressive in taking protective measures. And so the ability to return to school really does hang on those, listening to the local, state, the national guidelines, because it works, like you said, you know, like those mitigation strategies. And so I guess I just wanted to throw that out there right at the beginning. Franklin County, their 14-day average is a 203% increase in cases. You know, and you look at Franklin County's vaccination rate, only half of us are vaccinated. So I just throw that out there, not voicing an opinion, but sharing what the AAP, CDC, Ohio Department of Health, Columbus Public Health, as well as, you know, there's Columbus City Schools, the largest school district in Franklin County. You know, they're starting out with masks. And they're being flexible with that, because if you look at their verbiage, we're starting the 2021-2022 school year wearing masks. And so that implies, hey, you know, if we start heading in the right direction, instead of Franklin County headed in the wrong direction right now, there's flexibility. So I guess I just wanted to throw that out there.
Appreciate that, thank you. I think there's gonna be some, if there's questions that we can answer, we'll answer them. If there's questions that we can't answer, we'll just say we can't answer and we'll come, you know, that we might not know. And then I think there's just gonna be some, you know, statements and comments, and hopefully we'll be able to hear from everybody throughout the room, so thank you.
Could I respond to something Matt said? So,
Yeah.
Franklin County is around 50% vaccination rate, but the 43230 zip code is about 58% vaccinated. So in our immediate area.
Anybody else like to speak? Yes.
Please bear with me, and a surprise to no one who knows me, I've written the whole thing, so I promise I'm not trying to bore you all to death, but it's best if I write it down. Okay, so I guess while we all wish that these COVID protocols were not necessary this year, the data are very clear that the Delta variant of COVID-19, which now accounts for 83% of new US cases, up from 30% only a month ago, is what the CDC calls a super spreader variant. It is 60% more transmissible than the Alpha variant, and is also more severe in the disease it causes, particularly in children. And as of just today, the Ohio Department of Health states that cases have risen nearly 60% in the last 7 days alone. This is why the AAP and CDC have recommended that all children over the age of 2 wear masks when they return to school this fall. The brunt of this is a story I'd like to share with you about a close friend of mine who lives in our district. This summer, her family went on vacation to the Jersey Shore. They drove instead of flying. They didn't spend any time indoors with anyone outside of their family, and every adult present was fully vaccinated. They returned home on July 3rd. They attended the Bexley fireworks on July 4th, and of course that event was entirely outdoors. The following night, on July 5th, the 7-year-old incoming second grader spiked a fever. 2 days later, she tested positive, and the following day, the family's rising kindergartner became ill and tested positive as well. Within a week, the entire family, including their 10-month-old baby, were symptomatic and positive, with the exception of the father, who was positive but was asymptomatic. In that time frame, 2 more vaccinated adult family members became ill, and all 5 children and 4 adults that they saw outside only at the fireworks fell ill and tested positive. It was concluded that the second grader contracted COVID at an outdoor performance art event on July 2nd, where the family was in a maskless crowd. Because she didn't show any symptoms until July 5th, she was spreading the disease in the interim, ultimately accounting for at least 20 infections that are known right now. The vaccinated adults did not account for a single transmission. The adults who contracted the virus from the children are still dealing with continued loss of taste and smell, excessive congestion, and crippling fatigue. If children are placed into classrooms unmasked, we will wind up in an outbreak scenario and eventually have to close entire buildings. And as a parent who saw my own 2 students through distance learning at home all last year, I can say that even with the incredible dedication and hard work of our outstanding educators, we do not want to return to that modality. We want our kids in school. According to the Association of American Medical Colleges, quote, in the context of diseases associated with children, COVID-19 causes more deaths and hospitalizations than several viral diseases that have been deemed severe enough to prompt the development of vaccines such as chickenpox, and it appears to be surpassing the flu.
Child psychologist Dr. Michael Unger, an expert on the topic of resilience, states that wearing masks is a reminder to our children that they are part of a community, and people who care about others will tolerate a little discomfort when the gains for all far outweigh a minor individual inconvenience. That sense of belonging and responsibility for others is a foundation stone for resilience. Masking is a symbol of our shared respect for one another and an easy way children can exercise some measure of control in an uncontrollable situation. Many opponents of these safety measures point to statistics that indicate most children recover from COVID without complication and hopefully without long-term sequelae. And while I share in their enthusiasm, we must also consider the other ways that COVID can impact our children. If a student contracts COVID in school and is either asymptomatic or experiences only a mild illness, they're still shedding the virus for days before anyone knows they've contracted it. And now that child has unknowingly infected grandma. And grandma winds up in the hospital with severe illness or, God forbid, even dies of COVID. It could be a neighbor, it could be a friend, a teacher, or a staff member. And that child will now carry this burden with them for the rest of their life. Consider the immense trauma of a child witnessing this illness rapidly ravaging their classroom and entire school as classmates and teachers disappear into quarantine and realizing weeks later that a teacher or two never returned or, God forbid, a student. I am personally attuned to the dramatic mental health effects that this pandemic has had on our children, and I can say with certainty that the burden a child will carry with them after the aforementioned scenario will outweigh and outlast any temporary stress that accompanies the safety measures we must take to prevent the spread and extension of this pandemic. The data are clear that masking is an easy way to keep our children safe in school until they're eligible for vaccination and reach immune status, at which time masking policies can be revisited and hopefully relaxed. Even if I am confident that my own children will escape COVID physically unscathed, no one has the right to make that assumption for anyone else's children. We've been hearing a lot of talk about rights, but very little talk about our responsibilities. Every child has the right to attend schools that are safe and healthy. Part of protecting that right means accepting our responsibility as parents to maintain that environment for them. If that means that my family has to wear masks for a little while longer, then we're only too happy to do our part. And in an unscripted bit, I would just like to say, I know a lot of people talk about, 99% of children recover from COVID without problems or anything like that, and that's wonderful. But if you think about it, that's 1% of kids who are experiencing something that none of us wishes for any of our children. And I'm the parent of a child who is the 1%, not of COVID, but of something else. And so there is a face and a name to every child in that 1%. So if you think about 99% of kids recover, think about the parents of the kids who are in the 1%, because they're your neighbors, they're your friends, they're your kids' classmates, and they're not just a number. They are they're part of our community. So I'll end with that.
Thank you. Okay.
As part of your task force, you consider using data from other districts who had no shutdowns over the last year. There are several states, Florida, Texas, South Dakota, many other states, and within those districts, they had no shutdown, no mask. Have you considered that data with our data where we had the complete shutdown? So that'd be cool to see the numbers and compare, even as people. In regards to, I watched the CDC, they had they were before Congress. They said things they need to say to whatever. When there was questions, they asked how many kid deaths of COVID only were in the United States over the last year. They said at that time it was 401. And he said, no, let me ask it again, from COVID only. And the answer was 0. And so it's kind of like over a year of a pandemic and we have 0 kid deaths only. Now, any death, we want to prevent whatever we can, but we have to be realistic with the numbers. We want to trust science, but the numbers say kids, recover quickly. We have to say, okay, you can't shut down the world for something that is not really as deadly as they thought it might be. Now we have a year worth of data. It's my personal opinion. And I think adults, if they want to get vaccinated, if kids go to school with their parents' choice, mask or no mask, that's fine. And if the parents don't want the kid to bring home anything, they can get vaccinated and their house should be safe. I mean, if you trust the vaccines, you should be safe as parents or grandma or whoever. That's my personal opinion. But it'd be nice to get a diverse amount of data, not just from the CDC, Franklin County, different ones, even where people did not. They completely did the exact opposite of those things and say, what was their infection rate? What was their death rate? 0 or anything else for kids. But I think that'll help us get a a wide range because our community is very diverse. You know, we represent America. I mean, Gahanna's just, I think, the melting pot of the suburbs of Columbus. We look and say, this is a very diverse, and we represent, I believe, the United States. So I think we can be realistic with our data. That's it.
So, I mean, specific to that question,
Yes.
I think we can talk about the data that we looked at from the other school districts when we made the decisions about going back to 5 days a week, and the data that we looked at from other school districts when we made the change to go to modified quarantine.
Over the last year, I understand, but moving forward, it's like.
I was just gonna ask, I guess, some
Okay,
task
sorry.
force members to explain what some of that data was that we did pull in from other school districts.
Or, yeah, I mean, or administration, I mean, part of
That's
what,
right, that's right.
yeah, so specifically, part of what we reviewed is when, I mean, the goal at the time, if you think about where we were last year, was to get back to school. I mean, I think we were even looking at then, you know, we were all in and trying to get back to, you know, even get to a couple days a week. And then from a couple days a week, how do you get to 5 days, right? So what's interesting, and I think kind of an evolution as a part of our thought process, is that in a lot of part in great work because of Sue and her staff, looking at other schools was helpful only in that they were all mixed up too, right? You had some that were doing one thing, some that were doing another. So there wasn't a whole lot of consistent data amongst different school districts, and the superintendent and assistant superintendent were part of a group of superintendents from the region that met, you know, weekly even during the pandemic to discuss what everybody was doing and kind of keep measure. I think where we had our greatest movement was actually collecting our own data, because then I think our data, and it's just my opinion, but our own data ended up informing us that we were actually performing differently as a district than the greater Gahanna community and then Franklin County. So when we saw that information and we started making decisions and having thresholds about returning to school based on our own data, I think the community rallied, right? I mean, we had spring break also right in the middle there, which could have proven to be disastrous for us returning to school 5 days a week after, like, it was already announced. And we put out some messaging to people reminding them, like, hey, these are our numbers right now. If you're not making good choices and we start to get quarantines and all this stuff again, it's gonna impact that opportunity. So I think it was a combination of both, but we had a slide almost every meeting on the data from other school districts, and it definitely was all over the board. I mean, even districts like neighboring districts that were all in or hybrid at first when we were online, they were all remote by the end of the year. So that was kind of interesting to like watch that happen.
We participated in OSU's CATS data analysis, and so every week we got a report where we looked at how many cases we had in our zip code per 100,000. And there were times when we approached 1,000 cases, 950 cases. The power in our ability to kind of operate the last quarter of the school year was really looking at our local data. You know, you can look at the vaccination rate in Franklin County, but what's more important to look at is the vaccination rate at 43230, because that's really going to drive what's happening with us. And so I don't know if you want to say anything about what our nurses were able to do in terms of learning how to do contact tracing and managing our local data.
It was a combination of monitoring our health and safety guidelines it was a combination of monitoring our health and safety guidelines as well as monitoring our data. We were looking at daily student potential cases through symptom analysis. We were talking to families about things that were happening in their home or things that were happening related to positive cases. And then we were doing contact tracing within our school to see if there was school spread. And we really did not find through our analysis school spread to be happening in Gahanna schools, which sometimes was different than some of the data that we were seeing in some of our neighboring districts or as reported by some of the other districts on their dashboards. And so we were very fortunate that our mitigation strategies were effective in our schools, and our nurses were looking for patterns within the school, within athletics, within neighborhoods, trying to identify things that were happening outside the school, the impact they were having within the school. And the underlying or the common thing that we found is that school was not a reason that we were seeing any positive cases within our district.
But I think we need to make sure we're not going to have in our minds that that experience last year will occur again, because we have no state mask mandate. People have gone back to work. Adults 18 and up can be vaccinated, right? But I bet there's people in this room that aren't vaccinated that are not wearing a mask, right? So what we're talking about in today's world is not the controlled world that we dealt with last school year. So I think it's really important for parents to understand we've got a freewheeling circus going on right now in our society, where last year when we were able to control and we found no spread, we had a very controlled environment, right? Both at the state level and by people's behavior. They chose to accommodate and conform to what was being requested. We do not have that now.
Okay, we have a couple hands up.
I have like 12 pages, but I'll try to keep it as brief because I'd like to just address a couple of things. I forget your name, I'm sorry, but I know you had mentioned Columbus City Schools. I have a hard time comparing our district to them other than proximity, simply off of a lot of numbers. Like they have 50,000 students, we have 7, they have 115 schools, we have 12. I mean, that right there, I don't know how we can compare. And I know that I've sent this to, I sent a lot of emails to a lot of people, and I don't, I'm sure that those people that they email, I did say, I have 4 children, like I said before, and one of them does participate in school sports. And this past year during COVID, they participated in the fall and the spring. And at no time did my child come in contact at a school sport with a Columbus City student. But they did come in contact with about 12 different districts from all around. I mean, we drove as far as Lancaster. And yes, if you chose to put your child on the bus, they wore their mask. But as soon as my child, sorry, I don't like giving away my children's identification, as soon as they were participating, there was no mask to be needed. And so I understand we lived during that time. Now I feel like, there has been a lot of research. I know that I'm sure everyone in here appreciates 80+ articles that I've sent them to read on my 15 bullet points of why I stand for medical freedom and the freedom of choice to decide for your own child. I'm very passionate about that. As far as looking at masks, I know that I sent this to you guys. You're asking if there were studies to show. I believe I sent it yesterday to quite a few people that I'd be happy to share with other people. They looked at New York, the states of New York, Florida, and Massachusetts, and they compared forced masks for students and masks optional. And there really wasn't a big difference other than in January of this year. And it's actually the forced masks that you see up here, as opposed to the mask optional down here. I'm more than welcome or willing to share that with anybody in this room that already hasn't gotten it from me, although I know most people have. I'm trying to think of what else I was going to respond to before I actually was going to say anything. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Someone else also mentioned that these are recommendations and guidances. They aren't mandates. And I'm a big stickler on words. I know that because of State Bill 22, local public health and the governor cannot make orders. They can make recommendations. And I know that I've shared this again in an email.
I can make a recommendation to everyone in this room as to what I think they should do for their health, and they can do the same for me. But as a recommendation, I can choose if I listen and take your advice, and you can choose to listen and take my advice or not. That's where we live. We live in the United States, where as of right now, there is medical freedom in the state of Ohio also, not just the United States. And then I think lastly, I'm sorry, I'm a big talker and I have lots of notes. My question, and I know that Mrs. Chrysler had started out with it, talking about the task force, and I appreciate you going into that. My question was, and I know who's on the task force, and I appreciate, the ones that have responded to my many emails. My question is, I have the list of what their professions are. Actually, let me go back. I'm just curious to know, when you ask the community for volunteers for the task force, I'm just interested to know if you have a number of how many people said me. Because I know how many people are on the task force. I'm just trying to figure out, if 100 people said, I'll be on it, how then did you decide these are the specific ones that we're going to ask to volunteer?
Yeah, I can answer that. So everybody that responded for Dr. Perry in particular, I guess, maybe didn't respond for himself, is on the task force.
So no extras?
No, that's not, there were some individuals that did reach out that are not on the task force because we already had somebody in that area.
Oh, in that area, I'm sorry, that's right.
Yeah.
So somebody said, I'm a mental health professional. We already had somebody that was representing mental health, and so we tried not to duplicate.
Right, that totally makes sense. To piggyback off of that, my question is, and I wish that, I would have signed up my husband, but I didn't. Did we consider looking at finding more of a holistic or naturopathic doctor that would just give a different point of view? I'm not saying that the list isn't impressive, because it is. And they've all gone to school for a really long time, and they're all very smart, educated people. I just know, specifically for my family, we go to different doctors that are on that list. So I would have asked for recommendations from a different list of doctors.
I don't think that the request precluded that. There wasn't anybody from that field that showed interest, but I don't think that would have precluded it. I mean, the members don't all, they might represent different parts of the medical profession, but they don't necessarily practice medicine in the same way. And so we weren't specific to, you have to be an MD that we're going to exclude people that practice holistic medicine. That wasn't it at all. It was open to, the only thing we said was that we can't have facilitate a group conversation like this big, right? So we had to limit it to a person from each different field, and nobody contacted us at all from an alternative medicine or holistic medicine field.
Which is why I said I'm bummed I didn't ask my husband to do it.
Yeah.
But if I'm full disclosure, I think during that time, that was a really hard time for small businesses, and most doctors like that have their own small businesses, and we were at a point where, can we even stay open?
Yeah, I think the good news so far about the group is that they don't all share the same opinion. Right. And as I said, they all practice medicine differently, and they all practice it maybe differently outwardly as a part of their profession, and maybe what they do in their homes. And so there's a very diverse set of opinions about what the data means and how to interpret it, which is part of the beauty of the discussion and having them provide input, because I think we have been able to hear it from different sources, but would have welcomed anybody from other forms.
Yeah, I would just second what you said, Jennifer. It's not monolithic in thinking. There's deliberation, there's disagreement, there's divergence of thought, and so it's not, your thought about having your husband be a part. I'm sure he would have been great, but there are differences of opinion. So And that's what makes it, I think, a healthy, robust, body. And, I just remember back when we were so afraid of, the color purple, right? We're going, oh, we're in purple, we can't operate. We deliberated and not everybody was feeling great about being in school in purple, but those 7 things on that color coding system were useful for the medical profession. It was hospitalizations, it was ICU admissions, it was positivity rates. It wasn't about really school. And so they helped us understand the intricacies of what that meant. And the fact is that we could operate in red or purple, and that's why we were in school. Because, and I think at one point we were in hybrid and red, and then, we were even in hybrid and purple. And I remember when we were all back in, right, and we were about to go red again. In fact, I think you're going to hear tomorrow, I think tomorrow you're going to hear some counties are in red again. And that's not something that's going to deter us from being in school. And the committee helped us think that through in a deliberative way.
I think my last thing, and I promise that I'll be quiet after that, or at least I'll try to, would be, because it's not mandated or a health order or a law, if you go back to what the district sent out to the parents at the very end of the school year after the board meeting, it, quote, "Our intention, unless required by health order law, is that we will operate the 21-22 school year without masks or other COVID-19 restrictions or protocols." And so my question would be, since there isn't a mandate or a law or a health order, I don't see how you don't go with that, since that's what you said in the spring.
Yeah, let me address that. There was no Delta variant either at the time, and now there is. And it's gaining ground. And so I think it's really important to have the committee and, the CDC, Franklin County Public Health, and Columbus Public Health, and the Ohio Department of Health. They're not all on the same page right now. And so there's a divergence of thought even among those groups. And so what we have to figure out is how can we, to my original question, when we started the meeting, is what must we do to be in school 5 days a week for 9 months without interruption? That's our goal. And we're going to use any tools we can to maintain schooling without interruption. That is the most important thing we can do for kids, for families. Lots of our families have 2 parents that work. People are going back to work in person. I think it's extremely important, and I will tell you, we're going to use every tool possible to make that happen. We do not want to be on remote learning. We do not want to be on hybrid learning. We want to be in school, full-time, 5 days a week, 9 months without interruption. That's our goal. And I think when I hear from parents, and I've heard, our community right now is kind of split on masks. I'm hearing equal number of people saying no mask. I'm hearing equal number of people saying, please, my kid's ineligible for a vaccine. Please don't have school, especially at the elementary level, without masks. So we're hearing both sides of things. And it's tough. What's really tough is right now, ODH is saying masks only for unvaccinated.
You can't discriminate.
And that's what they're saying, right? And so you're exactly right. So what are we going to say? Call kids to high school in the auditorium and say, anybody unvaccinated, put a mask on? We can't do that, right? It's impractical. But that's their advice.
By law, you can't do that, though.
That's their advice, right? That's their advice to us right now. And so we have to kind of look at that. Are they going to change? Are they going to align with the CDC? We don't know. Yeah.
I just had a question. What mitigation strategies last year were in place? And either you have data to back up that it contributed to the low or no spread in the schools, or just you feel that was really helpful. And which of those going forward either are still up for discussion, are in place for the fall, or are definitely not in place for the fall?
So we're undecided on masks right now, but we are going to do the contact tracing in the way that we did it last year. Hopefully it won't be as a Herculean an effort as it was, and we're hoping that it won't be. But we really believe we need to do to the best of our ability. I mean, at a certain point, we took that on and the county was doing it. We were referring every case to them. And, they taught us how to do it. And with their help, we were able to our nurses did a fantastic job with Sue. So that'll be in place. Masks are undecided right now. We'll still sanitize everything we can, although we realize fomite transmission is not the biggest thing. We still have to sanitize. Right now on buses, the CDC has mandated masks on buses. That's a mandate. That will happen. We will have masks on buses for sure. In terms of the other mitigation strategies, we will not have plastic dividers up. I don't know that this is an aerosol transmission. I don't know that they work.
Is
And I think
distance
they interfere with learning.
going to be different?
So
Distancing.
will be, to the greatest extent possible. In many of our schools, the greatest extent is 3 feet or less. We're not set up to have.
But that was also the same as.
Yeah, that was the same as last year, right, right.
But
So
there's
masks
more
is
kids
kind of-
coming. I mean,
There's gonna be
we
more
had
kids.
we had a portion of the population that was learning at home, so
Right.
So that will be a little different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had about.
I'm just trying to compare the success of last year when you guys were back
Yeah.
versus kind of looking to go forward of.
Yeah.
What are those variables?
So we had about 18% of our student population on distance learning at one point or another.
And then I just had a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So to your point of that in the spring, the intention was to not have masks unless required. And then in summer school, they were required, is not in my understanding.
Yeah.
So what would have changed from summer to fall to get rid of the masks?
So the reason we decided to have masks in the summer is summer school is a very short period of time. And we didn't want students to be in quarantine that desperately needed to be in the classroom for summer school. So we just thought we were gonna get a bigger bang for our buck if we didn't have to deal with quarantining. And so we thought masking. One of the things we have not talked about and we should talk about is quarantining.
Yeah.
That has not changed. So if we go without masks, students will be quarantined. And the quarantine will not be modified. It'll be 10 days out of school. And that is not us, that is the health department. So if our goal is to get kids in school and keep them in school, then we should really think about quarantining and limiting as much of it as possible. And Sue, I don't know, at some point, we'll talk about quarantining. Yes?
Question about, first, I think it's really important for all of us to give a huge kudos to the district, to the nurses for the last year. Like, we flipped and flopped a lot, but I know that one thing I didn't worry about was my kid actually getting sick last year. So like props to that. The one time she was exposed, it was in daycare, and the school nurses had a list of exactly what I needed to do. So thank you, and I'm glad to kind of hear that that's in place. In terms of quarantining, so you just mentioned if we go without masks and we have to then quarantine for 10 days, what then does the instruction look like? Because I know based on last year when my daughter did have to quarantine, luckily it was shortened, but it was still like go to Lexia and Dreambox. Like once they went back all in, it was hard to support the kids that then had to quarantine, and my daughter was on Lexia and Dreambox all day for 3 days while mommy was working from home. So.
Yeah. And I'm sad to say we don't have a good answer for what's gonna happen in quarantine. We don't have, we had a meeting before this meeting to hire the final staffing numbers to staff the school year. And we're struggling to find enough teachers aides, nurses to staff our school year. So I'm really worried about the learning during quarantine. And it could be much of what you just said. So it's really, really important to have kids in school and not be in quarantine, because that 10 days is a lifetime in the life of a third grader. That is a very long time. Sue, do you want to talk about?
I'm sorry. Oh, I just called him.
Yeah. No,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I appreciate that, we're putting so much focus on in-person and being in school. Distance learning was really rough. However, to me, it is not the most important thing, because to me, my child's well-being, as you all said, well-being is very important. I know how my child feels in a mask, and I'm not going to get into her personal situation and struggles she has, but basically she is not heard in a mask. I mean, I'm not going to get into the details, but I know how she feels, and she doesn't feel like the school really, is going to care about her too much with a mask on. And I also feel like putting a mask on her right now is really going to be creating this irrational fear, because I'm looking at the numbers and I'm looking at the data. And when the CDC made their recommendation, they were talking about areas of high spread. We are not in that area. I have a list of numbers. We're at 75 per 100,000 over a 7-week period or 7-day period. LA County's at 2,000. San Diego County's at 620. Miami's at 1,500. So we're at 75 per the 100,000. It's very low spread in our community, and we're putting masks on these kids in 2 weeks. It's unnecessary. And, like you said, I mean, it needs to be up to the parents. Like, we know all about COVID, and we know that, kids don't spread it. I was looking at that Israel study, and, they had 47,000 children they looked at, and, they determined that kids 0 to 9, they did not spread the virus. So, I mean, we just have a lot of data to look at. I have another daughter who went to a school where she can't wear a mask because she has severe autism. And, she was exposed to therapists who had COVID, and none of the kids got it. So I'm just not going to let my kids feel like they need to live in fear when the spread, and it just doesn't warrant requiring it at this point. I mean, I understand if things get worse, that would be something to be revisited. But right now, I think there's no need to scare our kids like this.
So I guess I wanted to, first off, the notion that we want to go all year without interruption, I would say that masks are an interruption to learning. A lot of kids have problems with them, the cleanliness of it. There are a whole lot of issues with masks that do interrupt the learning. And then, same thing with contact tracing is a huge interruption. Quarantining is a huge interruption. So for me, the issue is safety versus freedom. And there are inherent risks in living life. Kids are exposed to, all kinds of pathogens, germs, dirt, and the way our immune system works is that our bodies learn from those things and create immunity. So, and my whole life, kids got dirty, they got sick, they got better, they got sick again. They went to school in the fall, and kids would get sick because they hadn't been around each other for a while, and then they heal and their immune system becomes stronger because of it. I know there are exceptions to that, but by and large, I mean, what kind of a school and society do we want to live in? And I would say also, now that there is more information about COVID, we're over a year past and there are treatments for it. We know more about how it affects kids, or I should say doesn't affect kids. We know how to treat adults. There are medications for it. I think we're past this point of not knowing. So, I mean, looking at last year, it's like, I think we're beyond that at this point. Also, with regards to the mitigation strategies from last year, it seems like you have data from what we did, and there's this assumption that what we did is the reason why we didn't have outbreaks or we didn't have spread, but there's no data about not doing those things. So you really don't know what the outcome would have been without masking. And like my husband was saying, there are districts where they didn't mask and they didn't do all these mitigation strategies. And, she brought some statistics that showed that they actually didn't do worse. In some cases, they did better. So I think it's time to start looking past all this stuff and trying to get back to 2018, where we trust parents to not send their kids if they have fevers, if they if a child is noticing symptoms, they are sent home and they come back to school when they feel better. Especially now that we have statistics on how this affects kids. I would say also that with regards to the vaccinations, that those who've been vaccinated are still getting COVID and they're still spreading COVID, partly because it's not a normal vaccine. It doesn't work the same way a normal vaccine does. So there's also no long-term studies on its effectiveness. We don't know the long-term side effects, especially on children. We have no idea how this affects their fertility or their development. So the notion of requiring it for kids under 12 or any kids at all, I mean, kids 12 to 17, there have been over 12,000 documented injuries according to VAERS. So it's not necessarily the answer. And then I would say also, how will the schools handle liability since vaccine manufacturers are not liable for injuries? If the school is requiring vaccines, will the schools then be liable?
We're not requiring vaccines. Nobody's requiring vaccines.
Not at this point, but in order to move past masking, I've heard it discussed as a, once it's approved, once it's fully FDA approved for kids 12 and under. I've just heard the parents and, discussing it as if that once it's approved for 12 and under, then it will just be added to the list of vaccines and they'll be required to have.
We have not discussed that.
Okay, so I'm just putting that out there for consideration. When masking goes away, this vaccine is much different than other vaccines. It's a totally different type of vaccine. It's an RNA, gene modification. So we really just don't know, and I don't think it would be the best thing to require. And then I would say also with regards to the contact tracing, regardless, again, it's a safety versus freedom thing because it's kind of in some ways an invasion of privacy. And so I think there are a lot of things to consider here as far as our freedom and where we want to be as a society and how we allow kids immune systems and freedoms to not be affected, where they enjoy school and they can be free and they can be kids and they can play in the dirt, they get sick, they get better, and their immune systems work.
So I just, I know of no districts that went unmasked last year. So if you have data on that, you want to send it to me. I've not heard that anywhere.
I think she's talking about non-public.
Oh, non-public, okay. You're talking about like private?
Private and other states as well, yeah.
Across the world, just being open-minded to all the different schools, districts and everything.
Yeah, I'd like to see it.
I have the whole printout from New York, Massachusetts, and Florida, if you would like to see it. Like I said, it's comparing the forced mask versus mask optional.
Okay.
But I did email it to, I believe,
We have
all
it.
of the board in the task force and building principals.
I thought she meant public schools. I do know of.
Well, I don't think this discriminates for that.
Yeah.
And on it, I didn't print out the other one, but it also compared the staff. So this graph shows the students. The staff one looks very similar. I just left it at home.
Okay.
But it's in that email that I sent you.
Yeah, we got it.
So I'm just gonna make sure I take a board member's comments as well, so I'm not,
Thank you.
or question.
Which resources as a school district, which resources are we counting on as far as looking into the mental health of students that are wearing masks versus how that's affecting their mental health? I don't know of any studies out there. I'm just wondering if there's any kind of feedback that we've been receiving from kids who, go a full year with their teachers only knowing half their face. It kind of creates its own little barrier. I mean, it's a physical barrier to prevent, obviously, for what we want it to prevent, but it's also an emotional and a mental barrier because you feel separated.
Yeah, it can be for some kids, and we did have opt-out forms for certain populations of students that struggle to wear masks. We have had mental health, we have added mental health support at all levels. Mental health specialists, we're adding even more this year. And so, we will have folks on hand to work with families that, as Lisa described, some kids, they just can't be themselves with a mask on.
Yeah.
But again, we haven't decided on masks for next year at this point.
Just a kind of a two-part question. So if, worst case scenario, we wind up in an outbreak situation in the school, is the decision to close the buildings, is that up to the health department or is it up to the district?
That's the one authority the health department does have. They can close a building if there's an outbreak.
So do we know what the threshold is? If we have this many per the building or per percentage of the population, do we know what the health department's threshold is before we wind up back in distance learning if an outbreak happens?
We don't know that, no.
I think one of our bigger concerns, throughout last year was not just a building shutting down. We didn't really talk about that a lot, but it was actually at one point absentee rates, not just from students, but also teachers who were sick. And so how do you have a classroom? I think there was at one point right before the holiday where we went all distance, where we had principals that were covering classrooms, and there were so many people that were either quarantined or sick, and maybe even just the combination of maybe it was COVID, maybe it was other things, right? That just people got sick by, and it was all kind of culminating. So there were some decisions too that just had to be made based on staffing and absenteeism. Yeah.
I caught an opt-out option for children who struggle with the mask situation. I was wondering if you could clarify that information.
So there's a form you would fill out describing.
Because I missed that last year and I dug for it,
Oh,
because
okay.
I do have a student that has.
We will have something like that in place.
So will they be made to feel, that and.
I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
How will the staff be prepared to treat those children that have been mask exempt?
Yeah. We'll treat them like we treat anybody else fairly. If there's a legitimate issue with the mask, we can look at that. We want kids to be in school 5 days a week, 9 months. We want them to learn. If that is a serious interference with learning, we will look at that.
Aside from my, freedom stance, I know I mentioned earlier that I have 4 children and 3 of them are on IEPs. I realize that I'm, sharing that with the world, but that's my choice. 2 of them have speech and language delays, and I know that I contacted you and Sue back July 9th of 2020 about my concerns for their learning with their delays, because with the speech and language delay that my children have, them being able to see the teacher's face and mouth is very important. And in reverse, being able to see my child's face and mouth. And I realize that they have the clear face masks, but my question is, if you're opting out for mental health, wouldn't my child with the speech and language delay be able to opt out? Because, they are getting services through your school district. It's not like I'm making this up. They have these delays. And I feel like the speech therapists that we have worked with have done an amazing job, but it concerns me about another year of it.
Yeah, I understand. So I'm not going to give you an answer right now, but if you applied for a exemption, we would look at it like we would look at everyone else's. Yes.
So to clarify, we're applying for the exemption.
Well, apply. Turn a form in. We'll look at what the form says and we'll make our decision. Yeah.
I guess so then I have to wait to find out if my child will be able to be exempt.
We have to process the form, yes.
Okay.
Decide what the policy
thing.
Yeah.
to even might have.
But again, you're asking us to make a decision. We haven't made a decision on a mask policy yet. So
Right.
that'll be a part of
But
it.
I need to be prepared because
Yeah.
I won't be sending him
Okay.
to school this year if there is a mask mandate.
Okay.
He had a really hard time last year.
Okay.
And I can't put my 8-year-old through that again.
Okay.
And I do need to figure out alternative options.
Yeah.
As a Gahanna graduate, this is not something I thought I would ever be entertaining, is pulling my children from the district.
Yeah.
I don't have severe concerns about quarantining at this present time. Due to the conditions of our community, it is a low spread situation at the moment. My kids have been in camps, sports, all kinds of things. We have yet to have a quarantine. I can pretend this is wood, okay? So knock on wood. But as a parent, I am their parent, so I am there making their medical decisions. And as that decision, I will be pulling them from the district if there is a mandate, and I cannot receive an exemption form based on
Okay,
his mental health
I understand,
of that mandate from the district.
I understand.
I think too, I want to go back to a statement though, and I appreciate your comments for sure, that I made earlier, is that we're in a situation where guidance is going to change. I mean, that's the one thing I feel confident that we can say here today.
Yep.
And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish I could tell you that, you know, we're gonna be all in and we're gonna be, until the world around us, until the pandemic, the situation itself changes. And I appreciate your comment about, I wish it was 2018, right? Like, if only. But I don't, and so I say that just as a parent, like heart to heart. I don't ever want a student to leave the district, but also as a parent's heart, knowing that you could make a decision based on guidance that we put out today, Friday, next week, whenever we're able to make that decision. And then in September it changes, in October it changes again, in February it changes again. And so I want to be very transparent about that. We have no idea, or it could be one decision that stays the whole year. It's just, we're trying to identify all of that data to really determine, what are factors for change, right? So that if there's a decision, and likewise, if you're like, wow, is this gonna be the decision for the whole year? We are working towards one decision or another, like, could there be factors for change within that too? And we're hopeful for that. Ma'am, you had your hand up.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this, but are we able to touch on what does funding look like if people are pulling their kids for the district? Do you guys lose out on money? Do you lose out on that student?
It depends, I mean, if you, yeah, we would, I mean, we lose our state formula.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just go back? I mean, I feel like if a mental health can be opted out, and I take mental health extremely serious. If you would have asked me a year ago what I was most concerned about, it was my children's mental health over their physical health. But that's just my opinion. But that being said, if opting out of a mask is okay for mental health, I don't understand how my child's disability.
So again, we said
delay.
we would look at the
Right.
exemption form you fill out, and we would make the decision once we have what our mask policy is. But I feel really uncomfortable making the decision.
Yeah, I'm not asking, I'm just saying, I don't see how you can outweigh, like, mental health is more important than
So if I
special.
indicated that
Like, I
we
just like-
wouldn't look at all of that, I apologize, we would look at all of that. We'd look at mental health, we would look at speech, and the things you identify.
Thank you.
Okay.
I hear a lot of confidence in the CDC and your recommendations. Would you be considered, maybe not give them so much, because they've been all over the place for last year. One week they can say one thing and another minute next week something different. So if we put our confidence in them, it's like, I don't feel like I want the CDC telling my kids, determining whether to be in school or not, different things like that. Lastly, would you add to the task force, a lot of people trust their pastors with their mental health and their recommendations. So would you extend the task force to possibly pastors in our community as well as holistic people? Would you extend the task force? So something to think about maybe for this year.
I mean, we can consider it as a task force, I don't want to give an answer.
There's a question.
Yeah, the holistic already, in the task force has been meeting as a group. I think we would just have to talk about it. The holistic, it wasn't excluded, it was just who was available. There is there's certainly the Ministerial Association has been very active in
I just met with them 2 weeks ago. So I
and
meet with them
sharing
all the time.
opinions about this stuff in particular as well.
Yeah.
So there might be different, again, the task force is just one group of people that are kind of vetting information, but there's inputs that are coming from, all different groups as well. I appreciate your comment, your question for sure.
So there's a question over here.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, what's the question? Just one statement, and that I promised that I would say when I came today is that
You know, one of the great things that, the ray of light that came out of last year is how the community all came together and how we all, you know, we were going to the grocery store for neighbors. Different things popped up and how we all rallied around taking care of each other in the community. And I think this is one of those moments that if the district decides to go to mask, it's not about fear, it's not about letting down of freedom, it's not about, even for me and my family, it's not about the physical health. I'm fully vaccinated, but I masked for that gentleman that left for his daughter. I'm doing it for the community and I'm doing it for the betterment of everybody. And I think that that's something that as parents in a community, when we talk about the village, that sometimes we have to sacrifice and sometimes we have to get a little bit uncomfortable. And that's what I think that's the important factor of it too. There could be all data, we could read data until we're blue in the face, but the fact of the matter is that this Delta variant, this COVID, all of it is community spread, and the community has to do what we all have to do to be able to protect the freedoms, the mental health, all of those things. And it's important, I'm hearing a lot about the mental health of wearing the mask. We also need to talk about, and I say it personally for myself and my family, that distance learning and having to go back to that, my family will not survive. Physically, emotionally, financially, we won't. And so I appreciate that the district is also putting that as their first concern, is keeping our kids in school 5 days a week for 9 months, because there are those of us that, like, my daughter was home from daycare just today because of a rash and she couldn't go to daycare. And I had a moment today, like, I cannot do this again. We cannot do all day and me trying to work from home. So I just want us to consider that too, community and doing what's good for each other.
Any more comments? I think we're winding down on time.
I had one more, just with regards to, as you guys follow numbers, cases, tests, and all those kind of things, I'm curious if you're also following actual illness, actual symptoms, symptomatic illnesses, because, you know, especially among kids, you know, shutting down because of positive tests, are you actually looking at actual illnesses, or has that been a factor, and will that be a factor?
When we quarantine, we quarantine because we work with the health department and their guidance says that we have to quarantine. Whether or not a student gets ill, that's not part of the process of quarantine. So I think it's important that we talk about the fact that quarantine has not changed. It may change, but it has not.
I guess I'm also asking, is there also any data as far as even last year of the cases that we've had? And just as you look at the data, is it being tracked? Like, are they actually ill? Or are these just?
Yeah, we track whether they get COVID or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when a student came to school or was reported as having symptoms, we then did a tracking to see if those symptoms developed into a positive case or not. And we tried to also look to see if those symptoms or that positive case, if it ended up as a positive case, was a result of being exposed within the school setting or outside of the school setting. So we tried to look for patterns, if you will, from symptomatic individuals to positive cases. We also then looked at alternative diagnoses. So if a student displayed symptoms that we thought was a probable COVID positive case, and that was not, it was an alternative diagnosis or a negative case, we also tracked that, so we could look for patterns in that too.
Is that data available somewhere?
All of our quarantine positives and symptomatic data is on our COVID dashboard.
It's on the store.
It's not stored there.
But
we have the historical stored data.
Yeah, we reported those Friday updates every week. We reported what our positive cases are.
Well, I mean, but broken down into symptomatic.
Well,
yeah, we have all of that.
Yeah.
And so I would have to where would I find it?
Well, right now it's in our nurses database that they analyze it, and we gave numbers to our task force and to our dashboard. So we could go back and collect those annual or those weekly reports.
So there's a COVID webpage that actually at a recommendation of the task force, because one of the first things they said is there's no place to go to find out information and things are changing rapidly and we don't feel like you're communicating. So we were like, you know, we sent out like 12-page letter one time and so we were like overly, like it was like ridiculous, right? So too much information.
14 pages.
Yeah, it was crazy. So we created a COVID website. Is it still up, Judy?
It is under district information.
Okay.
Now, it's on hold because a lot of it is still from what was happening in the spring and when we ended school.
Right, so because we haven't tracked it the same way after ending school.
The dashboard is still updated every week.
Okay.
We tracked it throughout the summer.
Yeah, the
Okay.
dashboard's
But
updated.
what we would do is every single week then update it with information so the community can actually see what the real data was. And so there was transparency in that.
And so
But
the
Sue,
numbers
I-
themselves are about though, we have that were symptomatic that became positive and that were symptomatic and did not become positive. We have those raw numbers.
So maybe you can connect with Sue after the meeting and get her contact information and we can get that information to you.
I do have one quick question. Did any of the schools, like in New Albany, I know, ended their mask mandate? Like they had like 1 week, they didn't have masks the last week of school. And I think Pickerington, did any of those schools have summer school without masks? I know they didn't have masks in the summer, but did they have in summer school? Did we
Some
compare?
schools did, yeah.
I just wondered if we would be able to compare that data to our summer school, the spread between the schools.
There was very little spread in any school district.
Even the ones that didn't have masks?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And we did have masks.
But yeah, you did, right, I just meant,
Okay.
because some of the schools did end it in the summer, like they had summer school, if we, like Tony was talking about comparing, or Angela, schools, that would be something you could compare, I would think, if like New Albany had summer school without masks, we had summer school with masks, like how would those data compare?
That's a great question.
I think the data, just in meeting with superintendents, is across the board very
About
low.
the same?
Yeah, very low
That's good to know.
in summer school.
Lastly, okay. The CDC, the PCR test that was showing the positive and negative of COVID tests, they're finding out now there's a lot of faultiness in that, and a lot of false negatives, false positives, and it also can differentiate between the flu and COVID. So a lot of people who showed up had the COVID or could have actually just had the flu, and these are just stuff that I think, you know, we really look at the CDC and hear them week to week change, and you start seeing data information come out. You know, you got to really question, you know, the recommendations that they give, even if their tests are not showing the difference between flu and COVID and other things. But these are just extra thoughts.
Again, I think that's a great point to the fact that, so that, you know, as you stated, like kind of that information is just coming out. This is so difficult as a public body in a district, right? And even this committee to talk about, it's changing constantly, right? And we're learning more information as this goes on and really trying to discern that information and understand it. And we're not unique, you know, school districts across the country are struggling with the same things that we're struggling with. And I just hope that if anything is clear, it's that, you know, we're trying as a public body to be as transparent as possible. We have these opportunities to hear from parents. We're reading your emails, we're understanding, we're sharing with you whether we agree or don't agree, what our data collection and methodology is. We've got some really good insight, I think, tonight, and some pieces and nuggets of information certainly that contribute to that dialogue ongoing, right? And then that's why it's a wonderful thing. I mean, there's lots of times where, you know, we have someone who maybe comes to speak at a board meeting and we might not, or the administration might not necessarily change a policy because of what somebody said, but there might be a nugget in there, right? That's like, oh my gosh, wait, let's apply this little nugget and maybe it changes the circumstance and helps us inform better decisions over here. So I am gonna, before we wrap up, I just wanna make sure the board, since it is the board's committee, doesn't have any additional questions or comments.
I don't have a question, but I think one thing that we heard loud and clear is that people would like to know what the protocols are going to be so that they can make decisions for their families. So I know you don't have an answer right now about when that's going to be, but I think
I think we'll be able to get something out on Monday, August 2nd.
Okay.
That's what our plan is.
But you said I think.
Yeah.
So I guess let's make sure that we, I mean, I don't want to commit to, I mean, I guess you're still, like, I want to make sure we are really
Once we meet with the
looking at
task force,
this.
that's our goal.
Yeah.
Let's say, that's our goal is to get it
Yeah,
out
okay.
August 2nd.
Did you see, we're learning how to qualify words.
Yeah.
Any other board members?
This has been a great discussion. Thank you, everybody. It's been really good.
And please come back to more meetings. Policy meets tomorrow and the agenda is printed. There's a whole list of policies. I mean, like honestly, policy's so fun. That makes it so fun. And what's great about it is that like we sit around like this and there's usually not this many people, but we sit around a table and we talk about each one of these policies and guys, these are the policies that are directing how we manage your kids in the district, right? So come and get involved and we have those committee meetings to go through them. Finance and facilities, Brian runs a fantastic meeting and we have Jeannie, man. Jeannie.
You guys do not know what you are missing.
Jeannie is.
I've been coming to these for years.
She's the only consistent attendee, but she holds us accountable to every dime we spend. And she finds out about it at the finance committee and she checks it and she looks through things and because we talk about all this stuff in the open, like that's the whole purpose of this. And then student learning and achievement, you know, we try to make the agenda, and this was another question, so I just want to address this and then we'll be done. We try to make the agenda and come up with an outline. Tia, the curriculum team, Jill Elliott, the board members of all the things that we've heard from parents throughout the year that's important to them. So in December of the year, we try to put an outline together of what we're going to talk about the next year. And some things are situationally relevant. So for example, we're always going to talk about high school curriculum in the November SLA meeting because we have to approve the high school curriculum, the program of studies in December, right? So like that just makes sense. State testing, same thing. We do sometimes get input from principals, PTA, teachers, parents, students. We had an example where a student came to us and asked us to talk about thank you, ASL, I used ASLA, ASL classes, and we didn't have that as an offering in the high school. Now, what we won't do is if there's just like one person or two people interested in it, we might not make that a committee topic, but we might send the administration to contact you afterwards. But we did say to this student, we're like, okay, you need to find data and you need to come to us with a presentation and show that more than just you and your family are interested in talking about this. And by golly, this student did it, came back. The board didn't even have agreement on whether or not this should be a course and whether it was worth the funding to hire a teacher to, you know, for 10 kids that may be interested, but half a teacher, right? They had survey data, and we discussed it after a robust conversation with people that showed up. Tia, how many sections do we have now?
So we actually are up to ASL 3 now, and we have a full course, 6 sections of ASL 1, 2, and then we're up to 3 now. So.
And that came about.
We have 2 teachers now.
It counts as a language, right? A foreign language.
It does count as a language, and we have 2 full staff.
Yeah, so it came about because of a committee meeting where a student had an idea and wanted to bring it forward. And we did ask them to go get some more research because, you know,
Kevin's behind you as this.
Just
Oh, I'm sorry.
a quick addition to that, one of my seniors just graduated and going to Kent State for American Sign Language.
Oh.
So it has now transferred to our major.
That's awesome, thank you.
That is neat.
Okay, so with that all being said, we're late, we usually try to keep these meetings, also, we really try to keep them only to about 45 minutes to an hour topic, but this was super fun. And so, thank you everyone for coming. It is now 8:37 and I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting, so thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.